Sometimes while playing Morrowind, I feel like sitting by the fire and taking a break from questing. And what's better than taking a sip of Cyrodiilic brandy while reading a fine piece of literature? Elder Scrolls games are filled with well-written stories, many of them having a real fun twist at the end, while describing in various details the world that all these games are set in. There are many bizarre anecdotes, legends, and characters to be found in them. Books can be bought in, you guessed right, bookstores, or can be also found in most random places across the land, in caves, dungeons, or characters. They can be funny, scary, educational, rare, forbidden, supporting the official narrative, or even promote heretical ideas. Why not? There's a little bit of everything for everyone. And they also add a sense of realism, of a living and breathing world with all of its conflicting ideologies, and for that reason, they are a brilliant world-building tool. You can pick up a book describing a condensed history of your favorite faction or historical character, and suddenly there's a deeper layer forming underneath the mere on-screen visual presentation. For example, take some random town which serves for your character only to stop by, trade, and then move on. If you add some history to it, an idea behind it, it becomes a charming location with a meaning and life of its own. I always understood world building as an art form in itself, and up to this day I still regard Morrowind as one of the finest examples of it, even within the Elder Scrolls series. Each title has its stronger and weaker points, and Morrowind truly shines when it comes to deep world building. I also think that it's because it was a product of its time, in a sense that a much more limited technical potential required perhaps extra creativity from the artists and the writers. You see, Morrowind was still very much rooted in the old school RPGness, trying to emulate to a certain degree dice rolling mechanics, as well as relying heavily on textual and environmental storytelling. So books were used to paint the world of Morrowind around us, narrating events that happened not that long ago, prior to Nerevarine, and even talking about some in-game characters. And this will be our topic today. We are going to talk about some of the characters that are mentioned in such a way, and we're gonna see what we know about them, what books they appear in, and where they currently reside. Because this particular group of people didn't end up in books randomly, they very much earned their names to be written down. They are masters of their craft, master trainers ready to train your character to the highest of levels, for a price, of course. We won't cover all of them, at least not in this episode. I will, however, talk about some of my favorites. My name is Alec, and welcome to another episode of Let's Overanalyze Morrowind. First guy that came to my mind while writing this episode was Alfhedil Elf-Hewer. He is one of those characters that make you scratch your head and go, what in Shore's bones is going on here? First of all, the name tells you all that you need to know about his, shall we say, personality. Alfhedil is far from being shy. Judging from all the elven skulls displayed all around his living quarters, he takes a lot of pride in his elven murdering axing skills. Because if true Nord loves anything more than meat in his belly on a cold winter night, it's his trusty battle axe. Alfhedil Elf-Hewer is a Nord barbarian and a master axeman. In-game, he is level 25, which seems to be a sweet spot for a large number of master trainers. He can be found in the Dunmer stronghold of Fallen Serrano in the southern Gracelands. It is implied that he offers training to others and makes a living out of it, although I have a feeling that he doesn't have that many visitors. Dunmer strongholds are quite notorious and generally avoided by regular travelers, and Fallen Serrano in particular is really strange and dark. It is taken over by a well-organized coven of witches led by Breton warlock Ilbert Merrick. There are numerous summoned Daedra roaming freely through a dark maze of hallways and columns, with ground literally covered with bones. I mean seriously, bones are everywhere. Alfhedil seems to be living on his own near the entrance, and he could have made some kind of a deal with the Daedra worshipping cult. I think it's kinda left open for interpretation, but they are definitely aware of each other's presence. Nord's living quarters look pretty decent and well organized, considering we are apparently dealing with a wild Nord barbarian. There is plenty of space for swinging axe during training. Not surprisingly, axes can be found all around, and there is plenty of drink on the table. However, the surprising tidiness of his living space gives me an impression of Alfhedil having almost a militaristic style discipline, which is, again, perhaps not so common among the Nords. This is a guy who is in control of his life and has every move carefully calculated. So, what information do we have on Alfhedil from literature? He is mentioned in a book called The Third Door, which talks or sings about the famous Queen of the Axe, Elabeth. Before I explain the full story, I really want to read the first stanza, even though I'm not very good in English and the narration. Verses are just so beautifully crafted. I sing of Elabeth, the Queen of the Axe, who could fell a full elm with 2 hatchet hacks. She could rip apart Valenwood just for her fun. She studied under Alfhedil in Tel Aran. He taught her jabs, the strokes, and the stance to make an axe swing into an elegant dance. He taught her barbed axes of the orcs bold, the 6-foot-long axes favored in Winterhold, the hollow-bladed axes of the elves of the west, which whistle when they swing through flesh. With a single-headed axe, she could behead 2 men. With a double-headed axe, she could fell more than 10. Yet, where she lives in legend has most to do with a man who hacked her own heart in 2. So, obviously we are dealing here with a fairy tale-like poeticized narrative of a most likely real people and events. Quite a number of short stories found in Elder Scrolls follows this philosophy of fictionalizing events. But the thing with the Third Door is that entire poem from beginning to the end really sounds like a pure fiction, until we actually meet a character from the poem, in flesh and blood. And to me this almost has a reversed effect, turning Alfhedil into a semi-mythological figure. And upon meeting him surrounded with all the bones within a desolate ancient stronghold, you really feel like standing in front of an exceptional character. But going back to the poem, we learn that Elabeth was Alfhedil's student back in Tel Aran, and more than a capable axe-wielding warrior. She could cut trees in a couple of strikes, rip Valenwood in half, and all of that. Judging by her name, she could be a Breton, but I can't be sure on that, and it's not really relevant for our story. As things usually go, Elabeth then finally meets someone who is better, a man named Nianeles Ulvard the Mighty from Black Rose. It's a city in Black Marsh, and Nianeles seems to be an Argonian, although his name, to me at least, sounds more elven. She naturally falls in love with him because he has better skills, but Nianeles rejects her, saying that he not only loves his axe more, but he loves another woman as well, called Lorintirai. By the way, I really love how all these names sound very poetic. Rejection, of course, makes Elabeth extremely mad. She then falls under the influence of both Mephala and Sheogorath, which, if you ask me, means that she is far gone. That's a one-way ticket. Elabeth spent weeks plotting her revenge and eventually kidnaps Lorintirai and takes her to a house somewhere in the moors. This is most likely somewhere in Black Marsh. Lorintirai wakes up in a room with 3 doors, and Elabeth tells her that one door leads to Nianeles. Another door leads out of the house and to her freedom, and a third door leads to a room containing a demon, and she has to choose one of the doors, and better be fast about it. Lorintirai, however, starts crying, so Elebet opened one of the doors for her, one that led out of the house. She, however, refuses to escape because she wants to see her dear Nianoles. So Lorintirai runs towards another door, opens it and sees Nianoles, or most of him. And the twist is that Nianoles was dead all this time, murdered by Elebet and cut into 3 pieces, which were then placed behind each door. So there was never a real demon behind the third door, but only another part of Nianoles. With the point being, Lorintirai will find her dead lover no matter which door she chooses. Well, that's a story of the third door, a pretty tragic book that's probably based on some real event. But what we know for sure is that Alfhedil is real and definitely regarded as a master of axe-wielding techniques. This book is also found in Oblivion and Skyrim, so his name and legacy carried all across Tamriel, which is pretty awesome. And we also learned that Alfhedil used to live in Tel Arun before moving to a more secluded stronghold of Fallen Serrano. He seems to prefer Telvanni-owned regions, which are known for being more wild and less regulated, allowing people like Alfhedil to operate more freely. Just my guess. He probably had a fair share of mercenary jobs across this corner of Tamriel before settling in and living as a master trainer, first in Tel Arun and now in Fallen Serrano. And before we move on, I will add that Alfhedil also offers training in blood weapon and medium armor. And I find very funny that his name, Alfhedil, also contains a word elf, since Alf is just another older form of a same word. Shardie is another level 25 master trainer and can be currently found in the courtyard of Bakhmut Legion Fort. She is an experienced crusader hailing from Rihad in Hammerfell, currently offering training to, well, probably anyone who has enough septims, but I'd guess mostly to legionnaires stationed at this fort. They would definitely benefit from it because Fort Bakhmut always felt to me as one of the busiest legion forts in-game, being positioned very near the Red Mountain, the Ghost Gate as well as the Daedric Ruin. It had to be a quite intense and stressful post, as well as being in the heart of House Redoran territory, known for being not particularly favorably predisposed towards imperial institutions, except for Shardie. And perhaps she plays a larger role of an ambassador between the traditionally stubborn and prideful Redoran and Western colonial forces. Because in the book Hope of Redoran, we discover Shardie's close friendship with one of the very counselors of House Redoran, Atin Sareti. So, what do we know about Shardie? We already mentioned that poor city of Rihad is her home. She was one of the teachers assigned to educate Atin Sareti, a son of Redoran Counselor, who was sent to Hammerfell. Atin's cousin was Andes, an extraordinary individual by all means. Since the birth, Andes had this aura of invincibility. He was never injured, nor sick, never defeated in a duel. He seemed invulnerable, and on top of that, equally intelligent. Thus, he was known as the Hope of Redoran, promised to lead the Redoran into Golden Age, but Andas hated Attis and wanted to take over his seat as the counselor. And when Atin's father died, he returned to claim the seat. But Andas argued that his cousin had been gone too long from Morrowind and didn't understand politics as he did. So naturally, they had to duel, and everyone was sure that Andas will easily win, including Atin. The book describes the evening before the fight. Andes whored and dined and drank with the counselors that night, confident that his place in the house was secured, and the hopeful new dawn of House Redoran was rising. On the other side, Atin was not so hopeful. Atin retired to his castle with his friends, Andes's enemies, and his servants he had brought from Hammerfell. Among those servants from Hammerfell was Shardie, who wasn't only a veteran crusader but a wise advisor. She of course heard about Andes's unusual blessings, that he can never bleed and therefore cannot die in combat, which made Atin quite desperate. But Shardie taught him to use a weapon that could slay without shedding blood. She spent a whole night teaching him various swings, counterattacks, and stances with this, according to Attis, primitive and pathetic weapon. That weapon was, of course, mace. And to summarize the story's end, thanks to Shardie's lessons and wisdom, Attin battered Andus, now known as an ex-hope of Redoran, to death without spilling a single drop of blood. We can safely conclude that this happened quite recently. Attin Sereti can still be found in-game as a counselor. What's interesting to note is that Shardie isn't by his side anymore. My guess is that her experience and skills are more required out there at the foothills of the Red Mountain. She wears a full Imperial steel armor set and Imperial broadsword, and has a rank of an agent within the Legion. It could be that she was already a member of the Legion back in Hammerfell, or found a well-paid and secure job as a trainer right there at the frontier. And by the way, in-game she offers master training in the long blade and not a blunt weapon, as well as major training in block and heavy armor. I also like to imagine Shardie walking to Aldrune on her days off, visiting her student Attin Sereti, now a Redoran counselor who wouldn't even be standing there alive if not for her counsel. Good on her. Our last master trainer for today is Abelle Chriditte, a Breton alchemist residing in a dumber stronghold of Valen-Varion. In fact, her situation is strikingly similar to that of Alfhedil Elf-Hewer. She seems to have chosen a reclusive lifestyle, but is still willing to train those who are worthy of her precious time. Now, while Alfhedil lives in the Green Grazelands, Abelle can be found at the northern edge of Ashlands. And just as Alfhedil shares the stronghold with a vile witch coven, so is Abelle living with a large group of Malekith-worshipping hostile orcs. It is sort of a strange situation, and we are once again left with the question of who is the boss in this company and what is exactly going on here. Was Abelle here before the orcs? Did she hire them for protection, or is she perhaps even kept against her own will? That will be highly unlikely though, since Abelle is freely doing her study in the propylon chamber and we have an impression that she is left alone. So let's dig a little bit more. Abelle is mentioned in a book called The Cake and the Diamond. It's a very fun read and probably one of the most popular short stories among the fans, so I'll quickly summarize the plot. Abelle is on a journey to Ald Redania and is currently staying at the Foreigner Corner Club, the Rat and the Pot, in Aldrune. She negotiates with a group of Dunmer thieves who are in the possession of a recently obtained large diamond. Using her exquisite alchemical skills, she successfully tricks the thieves and runs away with the diamond. Again, it's an excellent little story and I highly recommend everyone to read it. I will just read the last passage, written by one of the thieves. We never found Abelle Chriditte or the diamond. Whether she completed her pilgrimage to Al Redania is anyone's guess. The cakes had no effect, except to give Oediad a bad case of droops that lasted for nearly a week. Now, that was fun and all, but the story does provide few interesting bits about Abelle. Something that is particularly stated quite a few times throughout the story is Abelle's old age. And it seemed to be somewhat strange, because a repetition of a certain detail throughout the narrative to me implies a hidden underlying meaning. The very first thing we learn is that she is old, almost to the point of making Dunmer thieves grossed out. When she approached, they could hear creaking of old bones. And they even wondered why would an old Breton woman be so far away from High Rock. At another point, while she was brewing potions, there is a mention of her gnarly hands. In other words, they are all rough and gross. This becomes all more mysterious when we meet her in-game because, well, she doesn't look old at all. And the fact that thieves wrote the book describing their own exploits means that it had to be published some significant amount of time after the incident. And we should also note that none of the thieves, all three of them to be precise, are not in the game. So in my opinion, events of the Cake and the Diamond occurred quite some time ago, most likely years prior to Nervarine. Now, I am aware of game's limitations in terms of portraying proper character age, but this one seems way off. And again, she is a master trainer, not some random commoner on the streets, so developers would definitely give her more attention. Another interesting detail mentioned at the very end of the story could also provide a clue for solving Abelle's true age mystery. Thieves specifically use the word pilgrimage to Old Redania. Pilgrimage is not the same as mere journey, because it implies a more spiritual approach and a quest for personal transformation. Old Redania is of course the name of a remote Velothi tower in the western end of Sheogorath region. Originally, there was a plan to place a village close to the tower with the same name, but it was removed from the game. I doubt that Abelle was talking about traveling to the supposed village. But I do, however, have a theory, which seems to be often the case with me, but hey, it's fun. To me, it seems that Abelle was heading towards the actual tower Old Redania, which is occupied by the undead. And why would she go there? Well, it had to be because of a certain powerful Daedric artifact, which just happens to be located also there, the Bitter Cup. And my conclusion would be that Abelle found the artifact and used it on herself, which was the goal of her Daedric pilgrimage, after which she moved back to Valenvarion where we can meet her. It's also important to note that sometimes there's a difference between the in-game mechanics and an actual lore-wise capacities of certain powerful artifacts and their effects. From my understanding, Bitter Cup could in reality do much more than just mess with few of your game stats. My impression is that lore-wise, Bitter Cup could grant a wish, fulfill your darkest desire, of course with a cost. Bitter Cup is after all attributed to Clavicus Vile, Prince of Trickery and Bargains, the master of insidious wishes. And what would be the one and only desire of an old but wise, skillful Breton alchemist? My bet would be youth. At what cost, we would never know, but Abelle seems to be doing well on her own among the fellow Daedra worshipping orcs in her little magical chamber. Perhaps she required more time to ultimately cheat death and attain immortality through some even more obscure unnatural means. And was she successful? Again, we will never know. But I kinda root for her. In the story, she never murdered or even seriously injured anyone. She simply used her skills and intelligence to trick the thieves and achieve her goals. Simple as that. And with Abelle's story, we will close today's episode. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I may cover more Master Trainers in future. Actually, I probably will. There's plenty of topics to cover, and I even received lots of ideas and notes from viewers. I'm very grateful for that, and all the comments and support. With that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.